Hey everybody, welcome back to the Liberty Portal podcast. Today we've got some historic news. The Supreme Court of the United States has passed down a few really landmark decisions, among them affirmative action, student loans, and freedom of association. And right now we have some exclusive footage, the official opinion of the Supreme Court of the United States. We're going to go to that right now. Check it out.
When me and Brad first met, I didn't think we'd get along, but it turns out we kind of agree on everything. Your racial identity is the most important thing. Everything should be looked at through the lens of race.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke. We both have a lot of opinions about people of color, even though we barely know any.
I say colored people, but as long as we're classifying them, we both think minorities are a united group who think the same and act the same.
And vote the same. You don't want to lose your black card. Sorry, I don't know. I just think we should
roll back discrimination laws so we can hire based on race again. Jinx, now you owe me a Coke. Hey, tell them what you told me yesterday.
White actors should only do voices for white cartoon characters.
I've been saying that for years. Stick to your own.
Us white people, we have so much privilege.
I agree. It is a privilege to be white. Ask him about interracial dating.
All I said is that black men who date white women have internalized racism, and white men that date ethnic women are fetishizing them.
Guys against interracial dating now. Like, am I being pranked? Did Boomer put you up to this?
Ugh, you know that taco place is white-owned?
White people should be making white foods, like Kraft macaroni and cheese, no seasoning, not even salt. It's like he's a mind reader. I mean, I've been pushing for segregation forever, and my man does what?
I created an improv comedy show exclusively for ethnic people.
Guy segregates comedy on my birthday.
White people need to stop wearing dreadlocks, and they need to stop appropriating black people's music.
Shaved heads and country music, the way God intended.
You know all white people are racist.
I'm listening.
Even if you have a black wife or a black friend group, you're still really racist.
You know, we just kicked a guy out of the organization for having a black girlfriend, but if you can promise me he's still really racist, we'll consider letting him back in. Black people should only shop at black businesses.
I guess the only thing we really disagree about is I think white people are the root of all evil.
But what did I tell you, though? If we can narrow that down to a certain group of tiny-hatted white people, I think we can come to an understanding.
Technically, I don't consider Jewish people white.
Neither do I.
Okay. So for those of you just listening and not watching that, first of all, you should watch it. It's hilarious. It's by a comedian named Ryan Long. He's got a podcast of his own called Boys Cast. It's hilarious. And also for those of you not listening, you probably didn't know that one of those people was wearing a shirt that said woke and the other one was wearing a shirt that said racist. Can you guess which was which? I bet you can't.
Oh yeah, that's probably kind of confusing if you're just an audio listener, right?
Yeah,
probably,
yeah, that's a good point.
But I think that really kind of, well, it illustrates the point that they have very, very similar views on things. So should we just jump right in after that that nice start to things? What's going on with SCOTUS and affirmative action today?
So the short of it is that equal protection under the law means eliminating all racial discrimination, including racial discrimination that benefits historically disenfranchised groups. That's what was decided.
Okay, can we break that down in layman's terms, or just go over that one more time?
Yeah, equal protection under the law. That's just the idea that the law shouldn't bias towards somebody because of some arbitrary characteristic, right? It should exist to protect everyone equally. Another way to shorten that down is equal rights. The old classical liberal origin of the conservative, liberal, libertarian, something we all fundamentally should agree on because we're Americans, is this idea that there is no special class that deserves special rights, right?
Perfect.
And with that, if you say that what we've done is that since the Jim Crow era is we've made a determination that, well, in order to balance that out, we're going to give a special new class of people who are historically disenfranchised, meaning historically not as included in the body politic, not as excluded because of their race, special advantages. And what we've had is, the overall context too to this story is that over the last 20 years, there's been a series of court cases challenging this and kind of slowly, eroding it in a sense and kind of limiting it and trying to deal with the fact that you're asking a legal institution, the Supreme Court of the United States, whose job is since the very beginning to arbitrate what does the Constitution actually say, because the Constitution's supposed to bound the powers of government and what the government can and can't do, and try to get them to reconcile a 1776 vision of that with the needs of the 21st century. And what we've seen is a lot of compromises into that direction where they've said, hey, this is a thing that, we need, and, we should have a deference for academic institutions. who need to do this. If you go back to Brown, it's like you can't do the opposite. You can't discriminate. And then it was, well, we need to positively reinforce these communities. And the last decision before this one, I'm forgetting the court case name right now. I just had it in my head too. Basically said, hey, and sometime in the next 25 years, this might become not needed anymore, because even that court case indicated that it was contrary to the spirit of the fundamental of the U.S. Constitution and equal protection. I mean, that the law should apply equally and protect everyone equally.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management, Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com. And so what was going on prior to this under what is called affirmative action was that specifically these cases that the Supreme Court was hearing were about education and college admissions, correct?
Right. And obviously affirmative action has bigger implications. You look at DEI, you look at ESG, you look at all these other things that are institutions in our society. This doesn't apply to all of them, but it's a major shot across the bow for them, right? Because these institutions that we're talking about aren't exactly public institutions per se, right? Harvard receives government funds, but it's not like the Department of Education or something like that.
Sure.
And it has a we got 50 years of legalized racial discrimination in the college administration process. And I mean discrimination here technically. We kind of think of discrimination as the kind of preference setting that is bad, but discrimination isn't necessarily that. Like the larger old school word of discrimination is just to discriminate between people, say, in a good or bad way.
Just to create a distinction or understand the differences.
Right. So the case here, and especially the case evidence, is really particular, right? And it really clarifies it. So I'll do a quick quote here from Reason. The evidence that both universities engage in racial discrimination, particularly against Asian applicants, is staggering. According to the ruling, over 80% of all black applicants in the top academic decile were admitted to UNC, while under 70% of white and Asian applicants were in that decile were admitted. At Harvard, an Asian American applicant in the top academic decile has a lower chance of being admitted than a black student in the fourth lowest academic decile. So that last part is really, really big. So at Harvard, an Asian American applicant in the top academic decile, the very best performers, has a lower chance of being admitted than a black student in the fourth lowest academic decile. What that demonstrates is it's not merit that is conducting this, right? It's fundamentally that view of what they call the lop, right? Which is lopping off the top to make sure that the right racial categories are achieved when it comes to admissions. So there isn't a drop or isn't a increase in particular groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and similarly, Kyle, I shared this to you in the Discord as well. If you want to pull up this chart, it's from a tweet, but it's from, I believe, a similar source as this article. It illustrates it in a chart showing that the top 10% of academic students, 15% of white students are admitted, 12.7% of Asian American students are admitted, 56% of African American students are admitted, 31% of Hispanic, and 14% of all, which again just illustrates the disparity there.
Right.
And so that's what they're trying to correct, is to say, look, it doesn't matter what color you are, your origins, anything about you other than have you worked hard, have you achieved good grades and gotten yourself to a point in life where you are deserving of admission to a really established and esteemed higher education institution.
Well, it's even saying that you can include other backgrounds that are important, right? There's actually a great video here also, Kyle, that we could check out.
You guys are just throwing everything at me right now.
Yeah. It's down below the reaction from the left. It's the reaction from an Asian student, individuals first. It's about 1 minute 40 seconds. It's really quite good because it kind of demonstrates how else you can think about it in terms of those questions without asking the racial question.
All right, yeah, here I got it right here.
I think that this whole business, when we're deciding based on race, at least as a factor, that sort of assumes that all people of a certain race are sort of monolithic, that minorities are monolithic. And I know at least for Asian Americans, sort of the way that we're perceived is hardworking, no charisma, no character. And you see that in those, in the Harvard case, you'll see that that's how they view Asian American students. They see us sort of as bland and sort of lacking character. And I think that that's sort of what happens to all minority groups when you view us first and foremost as a certain race, and then just look at individual characteristics that we have later. I think we should flip that around and view our individual characteristics regardless of what race we are first and foremost. And I think that's the most appropriate way to do this. Because there, again, you can look at recommendation letters. You can look at, there's so many other things that you can look at. And I know that Umi was mentioning sort of this holistic admissions process. In that process, you have so much data. You have access to your parents' income, for instance, if you might need financial aid. You have access to information about the school district that you grew up in. And I think that information actually gives you knowledge of the student situation and sort of what advantages or disadvantages that you might have in life. Because any student of any race at an underfunded school district won't necessarily have the same opportunities as somebody at a very highly funded school district. And so by looking at what opportunities they had available and how they were able to make the most of that is not something that requires you to look at race. When you can actually pinpoint that the experiences that a student might have had through other factors that don't involve race.
And that was shared by ABC News, which is somewhat surprising that they would share an opinion such as that. You would think they would be a little bit more biased in a different direction.
That guy killed it. He did a great job.
I mean, yeah, very clearly. I mean, he states unequivocally, you know, individual characteristics should matter more than a monolithic characteristic. You know, viewing all people of a certain race through one lens doesn't make sense,
right? And additionally, that's saying that the administrative process here to admit new students already ask the questions and continue to ask the questions. Allow them to ask the important questions, like what were the barriers that you had to overcome, so that we can put your test scores into a context. Now, the additional to that is it really matters that the student is attached to the institution that can help them realize their individual potential. Not just this like really simple kind of silly idea that by putting certain people of certain colors into certain institutions, we're going to make things better, right? So the question is, and this is best begged by Thomas Sowell, which we also have something on this issue of, does affirmative action actually benefit the minority students who participate in it? And I also want to point this out too, that this is from, you know, a Senate hearing in the 90s. So this isn't exactly a new question, guys. And the academics of this, meaning like the study of this from great scholars like Thomas Sowell, who is an absolute national treasure. If you don't know who he is, shame on you. You got to go read his books. There are too many of them to read. But
well,
he's
a good one on that covers a lot of the subject is actually one of my favorite books by him is Black Redneck, White Liberal, and it kind of really dispels a lot of these ideas that people can have floating in their minds. But yeah, let's jump to that video right here.
Do you believe that mandatory proportional representation benefits minorities?
No. In fact, I think one of the great handicaps that blacks and other minorities face across the country is that they are systematically mismatched with universities in the admissions process. That is, if Harvard feels that it must have X% of blacks, and if the pool is such that they can't get X% of blacks at the same level as the rest of the Harvard students, they're going to take those blacks who would have succeeded in some state university and bring them to Harvard, where many of them will fail. Or MIT is a better example, that the average black student at MIT is in the bottom 10% of MIT students in math. But he is in the top 90% of all American students in math, because MIT students are so phenomenal in mathematics. Something like 1/4 of all the black students going to MIT do not graduate. You're talking about a pool of people who score at the 90th percentile in math, whom you are artificially turning into failures by mismatching them with the school. Back in the, much earlier, you had a great increase of blacks in the universities through the GI Bill. You had nothing like that kind of attrition from that process, because the student went wherever he could be accepted, wherever he met the normal standards, and the government simply paid the money.
I gather from your comments about MIT and Harvard
voice of young
that you don't
Senator
think there's enough
Joseph
blacks
Biden.
out there who are qualified to fill the number of vacancies allotted for them in those schools. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the word qualified is really misleading.
Well,
the question is whether or not they are like the other students at Harvard and MIT.
Well, okay. Well, so there's not...
So they may be perfectly qualified. This same student might go through, God help us, I hope there's nobody here from Illinois, Illinois Institute of Technology and do well. But there's no reason why he should fail at MIT. There's no prestige in flunking out of the Ivy League.
I got it. So, but my point is, you believe there are not enough black women and men out there that are the same as white women and men to be able to go through Harvard and MIT.
Yeah. If there were, it would mean that the whole history of oppression had done no harm whatever.
Well, so the answer is you don't think there are. I just want to figure out what you're saying.
It's not a question what I think. It's a factual matter.
So factually, you're saying factually there are not enough.
Factually, this study's already been done by Klitgard at Harvard, and the figures are all there. Anyone can look them up.
Okay, no, I just want to hear from you. I want to know.
Biden is incredibly articulate there, even as he's such a dummy. Like, he honestly is not getting what he's trying to corner one of the smartest people on the planet into some corner of saying, you're a racist, Thomas Sowell. I mean, come on.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's not ever something I've even considered around this subject, is the fact that, just getting in is really just the first hurdle. Then you actually have to excel. And if you're mismatched, no matter what race you are, if you're mismatched with the institution you're in, you're not going to do well. It's not going to necessarily just make your life better to go to a prestigious school.
Right. And what it's additionally that the point is that if they went to a better match school, they'd be in the top percentile of that school and would more likely to succeed. When you think 25% fail, how many of those people would have done better at another college? Now they have this chapter in their life where they failed, where you put them into a circumstance where they will fail.
Right.
And rather than just allowing, so what it's pointing to is that greater justice may have been done if we didn't have this arbitrary lens where we're saying there's a certain set of classes who are special, who get special access, special rights to institutions, and by benefiting them, we're doing that. Not to mention that this case is both. The case wasn't decided on that. This is just a supplemental point. The case was decided on how much it negatively impacts Asian students, especially, who are overrepresented at that level of academic achievement. Probably underrepresented at that level of academic of graduating Yale and getting the additional accolades of like what's it called, where your parents graduate from an Ivy League, so you get in on
legacy.
Yeah,
system.
so they don't benefit from that nearly as much as white folks because it's a white institution historically, but in the past, and so there's an evolution that has to happen there. But those people are actually being devastated by this. So one of the things that Thomas Sowell says in one of his books that I always really liked is that, what it means to be a minority has changed substantially, right? It used to mean you're statistically less abundant in the population. That's what it means to have minority status. What he thinks it means, and this is Thomas Sowell speaking, is it a group that you can feel sorry for, right? So that's why the point, in like the Ryan Long video, Jews don't count, even though they're a historical minority, right? They should, by the statistics, count as minority, but for some reason, because they're we've decided you can't feel sorry for them, so therefore you no longer count. Same thing with Asians, Indian Americans, other things. Additionally, that the Supreme Court case itself completely blows apart all these categories. It says, what are you just saying? Asian, Japanese, South Asia, China, Korean, all these are different groups with different histories and contexts in America. And by just putting them into this broad category of Asian, you're doing them a huge disservice, where you're boiling out a tremendous amount of detail that's important to fit your own goals. Not to mention Black, difference between African American versus a second generation Jamaican is tremendous. You can see that when it comes to immigrants from Africa, they're that tremendously different when it comes to social outcomes after the fact that they've immigrated here. And then Hispanics is even more. Like they were like, we don't even understand your category of Hispanic. It doesn't make any sense to us. So like that. I mean, so the whole mechanism of like these big groups to cram people into in order to get a social outcome doesn't work. And what would work better? Probably individualism, right? Probably admission based upon individual characteristics, moral integrity, your ability to do the job, right? Your ability to do your knowledge of the facts. Those ideas would probably do a better job.
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of people probably lose sight of the fact, or maybe don't even know that the richest man in the world is an African American. Elon Musk. He's from South Africa.
Our boy Elon.
Now, do you think that affirmative action worked in Elon Musk's favor when he was applying for college? Do you think that was a factor for him?
I don't. Did he graduate college?
I don't actually know.
I actually don't even know.
I don't even know his collegiate background.
I know he lived in Canada for a while.
That's right. He immigrated to Canada. Yeah. Anyways.
So reaction from the left, right? So the
Yeah.
Biden administration also announced they have several plans to help colleges continue the effort to recruit diverse student bodies in light of the decision. There's an interesting component of this that a lot of the right is freaking out about right now, where it's saying, there's a section where it says, students can still talk about their racial backgrounds in their applications. It's just that universities can't use that to discriminate. It's actually mentioned in the minority decision, saying, "Hey, this is something that we can use." But then the response to that, the majority decision pretty much says, "No, you can't." So there's a tremendous difference between a student's free speech to be able to say, "Hey, because of my background, this is who I am, and this is how my racial identity informs part of my character." Perfectly fine by this decision. They make that absolutely clear. What it says is that the university cannot qualify or disqualify based upon those criteria. That's what it says.
So a question I have here is how do we go about enforcing the effect of this decision, right? How do you tell a university you can't make that decision based on race? Are they not just going to turn around and say they're making it on some different justification? And also, what is the end goal here? Is the end goal to have equivalent admissions across, like percentage-wise, across all races? What's the outcome of this decision?
Yeah, so I think basically what it says is that it's not constitutional by the Civil Rights Act to do this, right? That's all it says. If you have a case, you have to bring a case, like a civil case or a legal case, in order to prosecute under this decision. And then hopefully, theoretically, the court system will uphold the higher court's decision, right? So if, for example, the next round of statistics of admissions from Harvard doesn't change substantially, then you file a suit, you basically do a findings, right, where you're like grabbing the data and get to analyze it yourself through a process. And then you, if you find that they're still making decisions this way, you can sue Harvard and get money out of it.
Well, and that is kind of the thing, is these colleges are still going to have every incentive to discriminate based off on race, because they're going to have that like equality metric, like how diverse is their student body, and because these things are helpful for donations and getting all the stuff. Like, this is a money, like, people have incentives, right? The universities have incentives, so like they'll not say that they're discriminating based off race, but they're going to continue to do that regardless. Like, it's the same thing where all these different protected classes for businesses, for whatever reason, like, like a business will kind of discriminate a person for whatever reason, and technically they're not supposed to, but like at the end of the day, they have to make profits. And if they think that somebody's not going to be beneficial towards them because of whatever reason that the protected class thing says that they can't, like, they're going to make that decision in the end. And you might not be able to like see in them, or like they're not going to say that this is the reason I did this, but it's going to be a reason why they did it, right?
Right. And that's one of the things, is like the fundraising letter says, hey, we have this many black students in our student body now, and look how racially diverse we are. It's never going to tell the fundraiser, the alumni, oh, and 25% of our black students are failing.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's the...
What matters is that we have a very diverse campus and give us more money, right?
So one of the things too is when good things happen, what right-wingers tend to do is to say, well, this doesn't fix every problem, so it's not that good. Right. When it's like, no, this is a tremendous win for against racism, in the sense of like, we want a norm of society that allows people to be able to, basically be considered, especially when it's a government institution. We could talk about private institutions separately, but at least when it's government or government connected or government funded institution, to not bias against people for their racial characteristics, because there's something inherently undignified. There's something that steals your dignity. It says like, you're something less because of the color of your skin, or something arbitrary like your background, like that.
Right. Like, you couldn't succeed without this assistance, without this leg up. So,
and then it provides like, it gives resentment in other people that aren't benefiting from the affirmative action too, which, if anything, that just is going to instill more subconscious racial tendencies, because it's like, well, all these people are getting, they're getting all these extra privileges because of whatever reason. I didn't do anything to deserve not getting those privileges. Why didn't I get the scholarship or whatever? Because of, it might be Asian, white, whatever. So like those ends up, like there's a psychology there that is damaging to the collective, right?
Yeah, well, and I think that that's a very clear corollary with what was also going on with the student loan debt forgiveness issue, right? Because you had a lot of people who took out massive loans to go to school. You had blue-collar working class people who decided, hey, I'm not going to take on that debt. I'm going to go get a job, start working, not go to higher education, or perhaps fund it myself, or through family endeavors or whatever, if they're fortunate to do that. And then when the debt gets forgiven, earlier last year by the Biden administration, a lot of those people were up in arms saying, hey, what the heck? Like, I didn't take out this debt, so why are they getting free money? Why is the government putting the finger on the scale for them and not for me?
Yeah, we got a great throwback video of Elizabeth Warren being told exactly this by a blue-collar guy who worked 2 jobs, worked evenings, worked overtime to put his kid through college, and do good by his own child and not ask a dime from anybody. And of course, she just laughs in his face.
I was hoping to get your grant. Yeah. I'm on next year, right?
Oh yeah, I remember.
So you can see the guy, he's standing behind her, she turns around.
I just want to ask one question. My daughter's getting out of school. I saved all my money. She doesn't have any student loans. Am I going to get my money back? Of course not. So you're going to pay for people who didn't save any money, and those of us that did the right thing get screwed.
No, it's not even that got screwed.
Of course we did. My buddy had fun, bought a car, went on vacation. I saved my money. He made more than I did. But I worked a double shift, worked extra. My daughter works, she's 10. So you're laughing. Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. We did the right thing, and we get screwed.
I appreciate
That's all right.
Classic.
Based.
Hey,
Based.
attaboy. That's a good white pill right there. Yeah, that guy's just a normal guy who went to an event to go ask a good question, right? And he's making the point that, his story in particular shows the injustice of the college loan redistribution program. And it was struck down this week. So, hey, also additional Yahoo, right? Good for
Yahoo
us.
for hardworking people.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, and it demonstrates how problematic all these systems are, all these all these mechanisms that we have in place, and how much they disrupt the incentives of everything. So nobody can actually get all these proper price signals. It's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, every incentive for kids in high school is just like, you should go to college, but it's not right for most people. It's not financially correct for most people, but everything is telling you just like, oh, you're just basically gonna get this free money. And, and you're kind of like brainwashed into this way of thinking. And then afterwards, like the people that ended up making the correct decision, and it might have been better for them to go to trade school or do something entrepreneurial, not go into the academic field. They made the correct decision, saved their money, and did something like that. And and now these people that made the improper decisions, the poor decisions to just party for 6 years, because that's kind of how long it takes most people to graduate, is 6 years now. Like, they're just going to be like, oh, you're good, don't worry,
We're gonna pay it off.
That guy has every reason to be mad about that.
Well, exactly. And even in addition to the pain of knowing that your buddy who went and partied, is going to get, the student loan debt forgiven on his behalf, is compounded by the inflation cycle that occurs because of this, right? I mean, you think about it, what's a university's incentives? If they know that student debts are going to get forgiven, you think they're just going to keep prices the same? No, they're going to raise them because they know that they can. And where's that money coming from for the government to fund this bailout of student loans? Well, they either have to tax the American citizen, the hardworking Americans, even more than they already are, or they have to print that money. And so that's going to in turn increase inflation as well. So it's, no matter any way you slice it, no matter any way you look at it, it really is affecting every American citizen to do this for a very specific group of people who took on student debt. And not to say that it's not right to go to college, but you should consider more of the cost benefit of going to college. And I heard a really good take on this from the All In podcast, where Chamath was talking about how banks, student lending institutions, if they had to properly underwrite, like analyze the risk, the cost benefit of a given degree, if they were able to say, okay, the earning potential of an engineering degree is vastly higher than the earning potential of a liberal arts degree, they would offer the money to that engineering student at a lower interest rate, right? To say it's more likely that this student is going to go out into the world and make good money and be able to pay this back and also be benefiting society, be benefiting the economy, perhaps more so than someone doing a more esoteric degree or something that's less applicable to industry, to business, to growing the economy. I'm not saying you shouldn't get a liberal arts degree if that's what you want to do, but it really is something that doesn't have as much direct correlation to earning potential. So economically, it doesn't make as much sense. It should cost more.
And
right?
this is anecdotal, but like I've talked to several business owners that they're like, I got to stop hiring college educated kids coming out. They're worthless to me. like so many people have all said it's just like, no, that like 19-year-old that decided not to do it, like they are like some of the hardest workers that I've had. You know, not all of them are, right?
Sure.
It's going to be the case, but like there is kind of it seems to me that a lot of like business owner type small business owners, they're hiring these kids and they're regretting those decisions often. So it is just something worth considering on the practice. Like maybe if you have an engineering degree, different story. But if you're just kind of like a traditional liberal arts student, that it might not be actually helpful for you entering the job market going down the road.
Yeah, and it could also be weighted towards, you know, what careers we need to fill. If there's I mean, it should be market driven, right? Like
exactly.
if there is a deficit of welders, fabricators, electricians, plumbers, which there is in this country, you know, we have this aging population of skilled tradespeople who are trying to retire, but they literally can't because there's no one to replace them. So who are general contractors going to call if there's not another electrician coming up underneath, you know, the master electrician? That's a serious problem. We need electricians. We need plumbers. We need people who are going into skilled trades who are able to keep the world running, literally, and fix stuff when it breaks. We don't need everyone in the country college educated. And I'm honestly really glad that has shifted, that narrative has shifted. Because when I was in high school, there was only one place to go, and that was college, right? If you wanted to be somebody, if you wanted to make it, you had to go to college. That's just not true.
They show you the fancy chart, and it's just like, this person didn't go to college and they only made this much money. This person did go to college and they made so much more money. Right? They show you that when you're a senior in high school.
But they don't tell you how much money that person spent to make that much money. Yeah. It's a lot.
Well, and a lot of because it used to be considered, and it still is to a large degree, it used to be considered that signal is like, this person is like, they're going to be good for a job. And it's just becoming increasingly where it's become so oversaturated now. Like it used to be kind of like, that person's a go-getter. They went to college and they're doing something with their lives. Now everybody goes to college. Right. Like there's like inflation on college degrees and they don't mean anything anymore.
So the value's down.
Yeah.
I think there's also probably a statistical problem there, right? Because you have like the engineer grouped in with the social worker. And then on the other side, didn't go to college, you have the tradesman grouped in with the high school dropout. Right. So like there's a tremendous, each one of those steps is going to change your outcomes.
Yeah. And you can look at the data
level.
Yeah. You can look at the data and probably try to find whatever narrative you need to in there. Right.
Right. Right. We also have an interesting ruling on the Supreme Court on freedom of association. So the Supreme Court majority ruled Friday that the Christian graphic artist who designs wedding websites can refuse work with same-sex couples. The court ruled 6-3 for designer Lori Smith, despite a Colorado bar that bars discrimination based on sexual orientation, race, gender, and other characteristics. Smith has argued that the law violates her free speech rights, and which is a very interesting question for our dynamic, right? Because this is something that there's always been a conflict on between norms and our vision of law, right? So our norms say you ought not discriminate. That's kind of a jerk move, right? If someone's gay, don't be a jerk. You know, but do you have the right to? That's a different question. And so then if you apply that to the college loan thing, that's also an interesting dynamic, right? Because it's saying, because of the Civil Rights Act basically said, hey, even private individuals can't. There are 3 different Civil Rights Acts. The first 2 didn't include that, just said government can't, right? Which would have solved the public school issue, it would have talked about, and it would have ended a lot of the issues that happen with government schooling and other different like beaches and public places, but it would have maintained the ability for people to freely associate and discriminate in private residences. This says you can discriminate in private residences, but you can't discriminate when it comes to college administration processes. You can discriminate on grounds of sexual orientation, but you can't when it comes to race. And so we have this interesting, like our social order is very confused about when is it just to discriminate? When do we think about as a norm that people ought to be cool, right, and be nice to each other and not do mean things? Like, you know, what she's saying is, hey, sure, she's being mean, but she doesn't want to work for these people. She shouldn't be forced to work for who she doesn't want to work for.
I'm gonna push back on that.
Well,
I don't know if
the
she's
second
being
one,
mean.
Well, I think, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to say what I think about her. What I'm trying to do is fairly summarize the way the social order thinks about discriminatory practices, like deciding I don't want to work for somebody because they're gay. Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, is it not like she has a very set religious belief? Like she's a fundamental Christian that believes in a very specific social institution that is marriage between man and woman, right? So is it not discriminatory to do the inverse of that, of forcing her to do something that goes against her own religious beliefs, right? Like is that not mean to violate her freedom of association? Like that's that's where this freedom of religion, freedom of association, like what is actually mean? Forcing somebody to do something that goes against who they are as a human, right?
Right.
Or your ability to just be like, I could just go get a different cake. Right?
Well, that's where the libertarian answer becomes really clear. One wing of the libertarian answer, right?
No, you have to bake the cake, Dave.
Yeah, right.
You have to bake it.
Bake the cake, Nazi.
Wait. What are the two wings? Why would one side say you have to bake it and one side say no?
Well, one is kind of like touching on the metropolitanism, what I'm talking about, which is like, hey, people ought to generally be cool. Like, don't be a jerk to people just because they have a different sexual orientation than you, or and deny your services for that, right? It's like a normative what you ought to do. Libertarianism doesn't give you a lot of content for what you ought to do. It does give you some, but mostly what it says, what you ought not do, which like don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, don't steal from them. What do I miss there?
Libertarianism is a political philosophy about the force that government has.
Yeah,
it's not like a philosophy, generally speaking, about like morality between individuals.
Right. So the other side of that would say, hey, the government isn't violating equal rights. There's no government in this. This is a private institution of private people deciding who they want to freely associate with, and so people have the right to do that. And you know, even if that isn't a cool move, you shouldn't do that. But we're not going to make a judgment here, because the question that we're asking and answering is, what is the just use of force? Is it just to force someone to work for you? How do you distinguish that from slavery?
Yeah.
Difficult question, right? I mean, like, obviously, you know, and then that, you know, if you apply that to socialized medicine, all libertarians agree. But when you apply it to someone who's refusing to design a wedding website for gay couples or bake a cake, it suddenly gets a little bit murky for some people within that movement. I think conservatives come down obviously on one side of it because they have a much more greater sensitivity to the religious sacred, right? Where libertarians don't, right? So we're more like, if the black Israelites are saying, hey, we won't service Jews, people rightly go like, well, that's a jerk move, right? Be cool, man. Like, you know, but you know, and that's a religious belief. Well, so where do we draw the line? Well, it seems like the line is largely free association for private, no free association, equal rights for the public.
Well, and there tends to be different axioms of belief. Like a lot of people came towards libertarian-esque principles for very different reasons. And a lot of these metropolitan libertarian types, they came for much more of a libertinism and kind of a much more running away from God because God chains me down. Like there's a very strict atheism that exists within a certain wing. So I think that they have certain inclinations when it comes to something like this of being like, oh, Christian person won't do thing for this because for this the libertinism tends to be much more of like a hedonism, let love kind of thing. Like that exists very much in the ethos of a certain wing of the libertarian.
So within that, a person who might subscribe to that perspective would suggest that a private business owner should be required to perform a service or create a product for that kind of person.
Gary Johnson literally said that. He was like, yeah, bake the cake. Yeah.
And you had kind of the metropolitan libertarian people saying like, yeah, like they were kind of on board with that. Right.
I mean, or not saying anything at all.
That's so interesting that,
or not saying it. Sometimes the not saying is a big,
the silence is deafening.
Yeah.
Right.
But if something else were to happen, then they would jump on board, right? Like what people choose to put their attention towards is usually a big indicator on where the axioms of their belief lie.
Right. But it's also like, there's also a group of libertarians who are into it because they just want to be jerks. Right. Like as much as some of them are into it because they are like, hey, you know, I really want to, I'm metropolitan. I want everyone to feel accepted and loved, and I want to run away from God, libertarianism, that sort of thing. Well, and there's also ones that are like, I want this, so it gives me a private right to be just a complete jerk to everybody. And neither of those are good ways to found your political philosophy.
Well, right. There's probably a third, right? Which would say, hey, we should try to be ideologically consistent here and apply the law equally. And if it's a situation where it's two people who are voluntarily associating, or if that's going to be okay, then shouldn't it also be okay to voluntarily not associate? Mm-hmm. Right? Even if one person wants to and another person doesn't, it's not like you can force someone to sign a contract. You couldn't force a kosher deli to make you a pork chop, right? Mm-hmm. Or a Hindu to cook you a burger. Mm-hmm. And these are, similar issues, I suppose.
But you could go to the court and say they discriminated against me because I'm gay, right? And then there's all these mixed incentives that exist. Right?
Or even just because I'm not the same religion, right? I'm not kosher, I'm not Jewish, so they didn't cook me the thing I want, so they're discriminating against me because I'm not like them. I don't believe the same thing as they do. That doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, there's certain sensitivity dials we have as a culture, right? So our religious sensitivity dials are way low in the West, and it has been for a long time. While our sexual orientation and racial sensitivities are cranked way up, right?
Meaning we don't care if you're religious. Generally, we don't care if you're religious, like if you're getting discriminated against.
Right,
per se.
right. But if it's discrimination on these other things, we think that's way more important.
Gotcha.
It isn't clear to me philosophically, and I would like to hear the case for this, why why discrimination against somebody because of their religion or forcing someone to violate their own personal conscience is okay when the other, and while it's not okay when it comes to race. And I think both of those are problems, right? Neither have a perfect solution, right? And one of the things earlier we said the Supreme Court case doesn't solve all problems when it comes to affirmative action, right? There's a lot more work to be done. Sure. The libertarian vision here doesn't solve all problems, but what it does is does create mechanisms of knowing who the racists are so that you can have accountability against them, right? So if you now know who will not design your gay wedding website, don't frequent that person, right? And if you support gay marriage and you don't like this person because of that and you're not a Christian, maybe you make that decision as well, right? If we can boycott, Bud Light, you can boycott this person.
Sure.
Right? And that's just one of those keeping the civil domain within the civil domain while also trying to encouraging a certain amount of, social tolerance of people saying, hey, we disagree. That doesn't mean we have to go out and fight in the streets. It just means we can civilly disagree and move along with our lives.
And we can disassociate.
Yeah.
Like part of the freedom of association is also the ability to disassociate from people that you might not have common ground with. And you can just peacefully okay, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to own a taco shop. You're going to own that, whatever other shop. And we might see each other and do business with each other, but we don't have to be best friends, right? We can just move on and live peacefully, right?
Mm-hmm. Is there a feeling in society that everyone has to be best friends or everyone has to tolerate everyone else?
It's the communitarian impulse.
It's the general global, neoliberal global order thing, is that everybody has to come together and homogenize culture together. This is very much what I believe is the center of that ethos. They don't necessarily talk about it that way, but it's very much just okay, we have all these groups. That's the melting pot philosophy. We'll strip out all the cultural identifiers of everybody, and we'll all be one big happy family, right? And that's kind of what they kind of try to push everybody into one big pot.
But that's impossible, right? It's just not. That's not a realistic outcome.
It's psychologically impossible. People are going to have indicators that will kind of separate people from each other, and that's just a natural part of being a human, right?
And that's, to be fair, that's also an impulse on the Christian right.
Yeah.
That says we're all going to agree on God, and that will make everything better.
Yeah.
Right.
Nietzsche would argue that was kind of the beginnings of it.
Right. Well, that we had a common. That the Middle Ages are defined by these, hyper-religious small group societies, and that we maintain from the ancient era all the way till the pre-Enlightenment era, a tremendous amount of people who were in small group, tight-knit, very religious communities, and then that unraveled, right? And with the unraveling of that, we still have that desire for those sorts of communitarian impulse, and one of the things that we're kind of struggling with is how to navigate the social order in the world of reality, given the fact we have these brains designed for that for a large portion of our history, and a world order that says, wait, we're going to pause on that. We're going to go for peace first, and we're going to settle disputes through free speech, and through civil processes and through free association and disassociation, and we're not going to use force. That's the Enlightenment idea. And what we keep, and a lot of the anti-Enlightenment pushback we're getting is people on both the radical woke left and some of the right is rejection of that premise. That if we just had a community to tell individuals how to live, then people would have purpose and meaning in their life, as opposed and reject the burden of the individual deciding for themselves what their meaning and purpose is.
So you're saying it's more deeply ingrained in humanity and individuals collectively and individually to settle disputes with conflict, to focus on the tribe, focus on the community, focus on, my group, family, whatever you want to call it, versus the Enlightenment idea of, hey, we're all going to get along and we'll figure out these things diplomatically. That's a newer idea from an evolutionary standpoint than the idea of I'm going to protect my own and at the expense of the other.
Right. One of the easy shorthand cuts, I'm not sure if this is technically right, but it seems to pattern well, is before the Enlightenment, most people's identities were formed in cults. Is that the right word? Cult might be the right word, right? It's like an identity that comes from the city or the nation or the ethnic group or whatever that you're part of that informs the individual what their place is within the social structure. And the limiting part of that, the individualist response to that is well, what if you want something else for yourself? What if you don't want to be a blacksmith or a miller, right? That's why your last name is Miller, right? It's because your families were millers, and that's the only thing you get to do in your life is mill, right? Maybe you don't want to do that. So the realization of the individual's capacity to reject their background and become something else, that's the dream of America, of leaving the old world behind and coming to a new place where you can adopt a new personality, a new potential for yourself, and realize your individual potential in a state of freedom. Not asking for anything from anyone else, but rather by having a set rules that are relatively fair and not bound up in this old world social order that says you're necessarily who your parents were. That idea we're still struggling with today. And we have these counter-revolutionary ideas that are kind of pushing back against that and basically saying, no, you gotta be defined by your race. You have to be defined by your background or by who your parents were or where you grew up or what school you went to or whatever. That's what both of these issues are teasing at, that in these polarities. The answer that it seems to me, though, it's always most satisfying, is to say, wherever we can, we should shoot for encouraging social tolerance and peace, while saying you have the right to associate and disassociate, because that's the only way I can really think through this question that navigates both those polarities in an effective way.
To kind of quasi-counter or expand on that, maybe, I do think that culture tends to exist very much in a Pareto distribution, and you probably are going to have Pareto distribution as that kind of 80% of, it's the 80-20 rule typically on things. 80% of people are going to find it extremely useful to exist within their cultural identifiers. And you're going to probably have 20%, if not less than that are going to be the kind of roguish outcasts that are willing to go and venture off into other cultural experiences and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And things like the nation, the city, the religious kind of whatever denomination you exist within, those are very useful cultural identifiers for understanding who's your tribe, who you can trust, and things like that. And I don't think that it's going to be I think individualism is very good for certain people. I don't think most people want it, though. Mm-hmm. Most people need that tribe element to survive, and they're very comfortable. They want that. Most people don't want the freedom of individualism because it's very scary. Most people want to kind of be we're all on the same team together.
Mm-hmm. Well, and no matter how individual you are, in any era of humanity, we have been dependent upon the tribe, mm-hmm. right? If you're outcast from your tribe in a prehistoric era, hunter-gatherer era, you can't just go hunt by yourself and be very successful. You need the community. You need a group of people to help, just survive, period. And these days, in the world of, the post-industrial era, we have specialization where I'm good at one thing and you're good at another thing. And in order for you to have shoes and me to have food to eat, we need to trade those things within the system of the economy, right? Which uses money as that intermediary, that liquid that allows us to all get the things that we need. So no matter how strident and individualist you are, there is an element of underlying community that we all need deeply, mm-hmm. from an evolutionary standpoint, but also from basic necessity standpoint as well.
That's a great beauty of using the monetary medium, is because you don't care what the end user is, right? You don't care what the languages or color of the person who built your automobile. You just care that it drives well. Right?
Yeah.
So
totally.
there's a tolerance that's kind of built into that, and like an underlying value that's more important for the average person in a market economy. And while I agree that like there's a Pareto distribution there, and that 20% there, the American bet, the Western bet, was if we commit and activate that on the Enlightenment, that it would create innovation and progress for everyone, moral and civilizational progress, and it has. The record there is so stunningly clear. And if you want to know about that, read The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. You can find it on libertyportal.com. And we got to do an ad read on these because I'm out of my drink too. You guys need to pop another.
Yeah, I need to pop another.
Right. Well, before we do, we'll just call attention to this beautifully designed 4th of July special edition label on the Zesty Nargarita. Happy 4th of July.
Get that nar.
Could you pass me one more too? Please. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to unf the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's zestybev.com.
So one of the things that I think, one of the outlines of maybe where the world is going right now is Balaji's The Network State right now, where I think what we're seeing right now, and I see this hardcore in like the crypto space where I am right now, is we're starting to find like new communities that are forming that aren't geocentric in any way. Like there's like groups and cultural identifiers that exist that are online right now.
Pudgy penguins.
Pudgy penguins. Pudgy penguins is an example of this. It's like an exclusive club of people from all around the world, right? But I think it's more broadly speaking, it's not just that. Like a lot of people that kind of believe in this like tech optimism, tech accelerationism type of thing, they're all formulating in like hubs, in specific hubs around the world, but they're all connected via the internet, right? So like we're watching this new form of cultural identifier kind of come into being right now. And it seems like Balaji's network state hypothesis is becoming more and more true as I'm watching that all play out. Especially as we're kind of like, we're no longer the unipolar world right now that's just dominated by the empire. And then you have like the Eastern China, Russia stuff. Like we're starting to splinter off a lot more right now.
And you're seeing that in regards to the free association question.
Yeah.
Which is that we're kind of forced into association by politics. And what the internet does as a disintermediary is that it separates that out. And it says that the large space that isn't politics that you can find your community. Like you're a furry. You can go find.
Yeah, you can go be a furry somewhere.
Why are you
right?
looking at me so intently when you say that?
Joe, do you have something to tell us,
guys? I like dressing up like a dog, doing weird things.
No judgment, bro. No judgment. Kyle might judge you, but I'm not gonna.
I'm gonna judge you.
That's fair.
And this is coming from the guy that LARPs as a penguin on Twitter every day.
There we go. We got something in common, you and I. We're not so different.
Follow me at Captain Quigley for my penguin adventures.
Oh man.
Well, it is very interesting. And I actually, going back to this, I want to know what you think. Is there an economic underlayer of the racial tension that exists in the country? Like how has monetary policy, fiscal policy affected what's gone on in the United States that's caused these rifts that we find ourselves battling with today?
It's economic inequality is driven by. Kyle knows what I'm going to say right now.
Well, no, I was just going to say, you're asking a libertarian to ask, why is monetary policy the crux of all evils?
It wouldn't be an episode of this podcast.
I queued it up very deliberately. Okay,
oh, man. Well, okay. So a tremendous amount of economic inequality is driven not only by, of course, federal policy. Inflation has its effects, and obviously the people who are hurt first are the people who can't afford the rise in the prices, who don't have assets that are also increasing at the same rate as the general price inflation. Second to that, if you look at the statistics of the implementation of the minimum wage, tremendously bad for the black community, right? So the young African-American workers were put out of labor for decades because of the minimum wage. the impacts of that were devastating for them. Right to not right to work, but pretty much the 1936 Labor Act on the federal level, basically making unions compulsory, discriminated vastly, very terribly against African Americans who were in the trades, saying, "Hey, you can't call yourself an electrician anymore or a plumber or whatever because you're not part of a union."
Was there some sort of restriction for African Americans to join?
Not explicitly, implicitly, right? So it said if your workplace basically was unionized, you're not doing that. And then guess who didn't make the cut?
I see.
And like the effects.
It was an implicit way to execute a racist move against African Americans by saying we don't want you to be part of the union.
I don't want to make it like this is what their intent was, but
Sure.
it's definitely the effect. Is that unionization in its origin, not today. No, I'm not making any claims about a union today, but in its origin, were literally combatives. You had black unions versus white unions, stuff like that. Like this was as the atmosphere at the time, especially in the American South, was racialized in this dynamic, and unions were an expression of that. That's a lot fairer way to say it.
Okay.
And so one of the things that happened with the Labor Act is that it kind of became a forcing function for some of that, and we saw a lot of black labor die. And there was
not literally die, but
die off.
Away.
Yeah. Sorry. And so beyond that, I mean, there was also obviously lots of civil things. I mean, when you look at like racial redlining, zoning, all these other things that happened with our makeup of cities, there's so many different things you can point to when it comes to government policy is a driver of income inequality that very specifically harmed the black community and minorities first. Now that didn't apply to, and Thomas Sowell is a great resource on this. It didn't apply to lots of other racial groups, both for proscription by the kind of white elites who were there, like they weren't targeting Asians as much as they were Hispanics, as much as they were blacks. But there was also, the fact that, where they were in the context of the time and the makeup and the actions of those racial groups. Like Irish, for example, had a very different history with these sorts of institutions where they were originally very biased against and then found an avenue to get in on the inside. There's a whole philosophy today that says that that's somehow evil thing to do. Indian Americans, very similar story. They now have a higher average wage than white Americans, many other Asian Americans in the same category. And then you have other racial ethnicities that are kind of in the same buckets when it comes to Middle Eastern folks that have a very high net income and have racial enclaves that are very prosperous in the United States. So it isn't that it's too simple to just say it was just the white majority versus everybody else, right? It's a much more complicated story that has a lot to do with both the negative impacts that were done through government policy and civil action by large civil players that were terrible. Look at Henry Ford, look at, other guys who are tremendously racist against Jews and other racial minorities. But then also the actions of those other, racial groups that had, good institutions right within them. Go to school, don't have kids outside of wedlock, get married and have kids within a stable relationship, like good advice, good moral institutions that reinforce good behaviors, which in aggregate produced better outcomes for those racial groups that were kind of living within that. And that becomes very clear when you look at Jews, Catholic, Irish, and oh God, I'm losing right now. It's a particular African ethnicity that has very high net income in the United States right now. I'm like totally gapping it.
Isn't it?
Ethiopian? No.
Elon Musk.
South Africans.
South African. No, that's not right.
I'm curious. I want to dig in
Jamaican, Jamaican Americans.
I know that's a big thing. Is the splinter and almost like civil war in the black community of like those that have like their American heritage based in slavery, and then also the Jamaicans. Right. Like I know that's like a very big thing, and Jamaicans are just like way outperforming, generally speaking, traditional African Americans, and it tends to be, and there tends to be like a splinter that's just like, well, you weren't slaves like us, kind of thing, right?
And I think any side that only tells one side, any story that only tells one side of that equation isn't really fully interacting with the content as I see it. And I see this as an alien, right? I'm a kid who grew up in rural Montana, right? So this is all academic to me. I'm just looking at this from the outside, saying I didn't grow up with any racial bias or any of these kind of institutions as neither barriers nor like informing for anything. So what isn't, I just kind of read and see what I'm seeing and trying to interact with it honestly. And I see two sides of an equation. Institutions that are oppressive and have lots of problems and are real, like the criminal justice system, is tremendously negative towards both, African Americans as a bias. Like you can see African Americans who spend way more time in prison versus, non-African counterparts for the same crime. You can have, and then you can break it down lots of other ways. Men serve longer times than women for the same crime, and all kinds of other breakdowns that are unequal within our barriers in society. But then there's also the actions of individuals really, really matter too in a state of relative freedom, right? So we could be the Raj in India, and nothing would change. Everything would be informed by your ancestors, right? You could have permanent. We could be America in the American South, where everything's locked in, your social class and by your race and by your parents' income. So because we have the amount of freedom we do, which is not perfect, and we have these government barriers, we still have a tremendous amount of dislocation from that narrative of it's just the barriers. There's a tremendous amount that matters when it comes to your civic and individual institutions.
Mm-hmm. Something to add on to as well with your kind of labor union stuff is I believe that is the original origins of the KKK was post-Civil War. It was very much these Southerners that were just like, they're taking our jobs type of a thing. Like that was the original first iteration of the KKK was like, oh, well, now we're out of work because all these, these former slaves are coming in and they're going to work cheaper and do all this stuff because, they went from working for zero to working for some amount of money and they're willing to take less pay. And they were starting to get all the jobs. And then you have, all these people that are just like, we want those jobs. Like they're taking all of our jobs right now. And that was that resentment that formed the original KKK.
And being out of work, they couldn't afford new clothes. So they took bed sheets. They dressed themselves in them.
Yeah, they got the pointy hat.
Yeah. Classic tale. I want to dig in on the minimum wage thing because I think people have this picture of the minimum wage as being necessary for providing a living wage for someone living in an expensive world. Is it better? No, let me frame it differently. Is it not predatory for a company to offer someone a wage that is below minimum wage? Why would that be there? How could someone live on that in an economy such as the one we're in right now? How could that work?
Right. So it is difficult because you have market signal destroying mechanisms like the Fed. You have signal destroying mechanisms like government policy and housing that is artificially raising the price of housing. Asset manipulation that's happening with all kinds of mechanisms of government. You have high taxes that could also destroy these signals and make it very difficult. If taxes are too high, it makes it very difficult for people to be able to, even on low wage, be able to earn money, right? So if you give someone who's already on low wage, like we talked about a little while ago, we got into the discussion of immigration, the more you tax labor with labor taxes, the more people are going to go into a dark or into a black market. How do people live? So the question is who sets the labor, and can someone rationally set a price for all labor uniformly that actually matches where people are at, right? So even an example, I'll give Montana an example. Some time ago, I was at a committee hearing on an increase in the minimum wage in Montana. A guy came from, have you ever heard of Yak, Montana?
I have, actually.
Yeah, it's a famous one, if only because of the name. And it's so obscure and tiny. Ran a small burger joint there. Had just a couple employees, 3 or 4 employees that work with him. Right now, they are all paid minimum wage. And basically what he testified is like, look, you raise this $1 and I'm out. I can't do it because the economy in Yak is not the economy in Billings, is not the economy in Denver, is not the economy in New York City, et cetera, et cetera. Like the prices are contextual and they're a signal for the local knowledge that exists. So anytime you have a government agency, no matter how empowered with knowledge they are, how much power they have to change things, they can't anticipate the actual effects of or know what the right price level is to set. So my point is that a minimum wage is set by the individual's skills and the market clearing ability of them to clear those skills, right? So their ability to sell those skills to employers and the desire of the value that will contribute for, individuals. Because it's important to remember that labor exists to produce something to serve someone else's needs. Otherwise, what's the point of labor? And the reason why we attach a price to it is to compensate the individual for the time and the skills that they do when they actually create value for somebody else. And if you mess with that, if you change that, if you set a floor on it, you create a whole new black market. And unfortunately, what happened when it come to especially black youth at the implementation of minimum wage throughout the 1950s and 60s was a tremendous amount found themselves in perpetual long-term unemployment. And that had devastating consequences for the black community. Additionally, that the long-term consequences of, at the same time, the implementation of welfare and larger welfare schemes hooked them into a government dependent scheme, which also had lots of bad effects when it comes to separation of the black family. Once again, don't listen to me. Read Thomas Sowell. Like, yeah, obviously no one's going to believe me when I say this, but if you read Thomas Sowell, you will find the studies here are absolutely rock solid, and it's so pervasive when it comes to long-term marriages within the black community, out of child wedlock, all these sorts of things. And it's not, and I don't say this as like how, like, oh my goodness, they did something wrong. What I see them is responding to government incentives that were evil in the first place. That if the government just would have stayed out of it, we'd have a far more affluent, far more integrated with the economy black community. But because of the racial, slavery, racial segregation, and then government policy, which was mostly labor policy supported by the left, unfortunately devastated the black, and welfare policy devastated the black community over that time. Not to mention abortion policy, which was also tremendously devastating to the black community over that same period of time.
Man, it's like it's like every government policy that there was devastating to the black community.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, drug laws. I mean, the drug. I mean, like, yeah, and that's a whole nother thing. You can't even
count them on,
right? Yeah. We literally punish, a certain kind of crack differently if it's in crack form or if it's in, cocaine powder form, right?
Because cocaine is a upper class white people drug.
Yeah, and when it's in a different form, it's in crystal, then it's bad. The prosecution of the drug war, specifically by Nixon, was targeted towards the black community and trying to end the jazz cabbage, right? You can't look at a single one of these and not see a government finger right in the middle of it. I mean, the CIA and the FBI's actions, I mean, to get into the intelligence community is always all over this stuff. Actions at this time when it came to the Black Panthers and Martin Luther King and all these other black leaders messing in that. I mean, for God's sakes, the FBI tried to get Martin Luther King to commit suicide. I mean, like you got an actual government enforcement agency trying to get an American citizen to commit suicide, right? And like that's a known fact. And we're over here saying, oh man, the black community, if they just would have got their act together, well, they're being persecuted by the government, of course. I mean, like with all these all these laws and some of them I'm sure very, very well meaning, and some of them obviously maliciously meaning. In either direction, what we're talking about is the reason why we have a two-tiered society like this isn't because of freedom. It's not because we have a free and open society defined by markets and free cooperation and individuals settling disputes with association and free association. What we have is a government-managed everything, starting on the state level for a lot of this stuff. Jim Crow, the biggest problem with Jim Crow, sorry, I'm like ranting. You know?
I love it.
The biggest problem with Jim Crow wasn't that, not just that private owners were discriminating. It was that the government enforced discrimination so that there could be no market alternative. Once again, I'm quoting Thomas Sowell. The government itself was saying, hey, if you do these things, we will have a problem, right? To private business owners. And then there's the culture of pressure and stuff like that. And those are real. And I'm not saying they're not real. But you couldn't get the kind of bottom-up opposition because the government would disrupt that with government action. So
is there like inherent racism in the actions of the government during this time?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Jim Crow.
You want a quote here from Nixon's like big domestic advisor?
Oh, sure.
That I just found. John Ehrlichman, he was Nixon's advisor in domestic policy. You want to know what this was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news.
So there's no wonder why. I mean, it's I don't wonder that it's so fascinating to me to see, Hotep Jesus types, right, who are both anti-government and saying we need a black identity that is separate from this mainstream black identity. I mean, I can understand that, right, because there's so much there. I mean, it's like being Native American and anti-government. Of course you would be, right?
Well, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, because these are the people that are committing a genocide against you, I mean, have been for centuries. It makes sense. So, like, it frustrates me how much of libertarian thought is dominated by people who look like me, when to me, all I see are people who aren't white, who are paying the biggest cost of a big state that's trying to get up and fix all the problems. Because that same impulse to fix the problems also empowers them to persecute the people they don't like.
Well, people want their saviors, right? Like the savior complex is very real. I think when people are generally stewing in resentment about whatever things, rightfully or wrongfully, whatever it is, there is this kind of psychology of like, well, someone's going to come to save us, or somebody will kind of force the actions against my aggressors or whatever, right? So like the idea, because like the general libertarian ethos is very much pick yourself up and kind of do things yourself, but the average person is not set in that mindset. The average person wants to stew in resentment, because resentment is a very powerful drug.
Sure. But
then you do have the breakaways, right? Thomas Sowell is an example of that. The Hotep Jesus, the whole Hotep movement is very much a individualistic, let's kind of create a new identity type of movement, right? Mm-hmm. If you're not familiar with the Hoteps, look it up. It's interesting.
I know nothing about it. I'm not trying to be an expert.
I just know Hotep Jesus because he's fun on Twitter.
He's been on some podcasts already. He's edgy and funny.
But I think the average person, in whatever their situation is, like, it doesn't have to be a racial thing. It can just be they have some sort of problem that exists in their life. They will stew in that resentment forever unless they figure out some sort of way to break out of it. Mm-hmm. And the individualism, I think, ethos is an antidote to that, but it's a very kind of difficult pill to swallow, right, for most people.
I mean, at minimum, I don't even need an individualism. I just need that the state is your biggest problem. So just being anti-state would be a great start.
No, but like to the state's also providing food stamps.
Yeah, it always looks like the easiest way to a solution to any problem, right? We'll just force the government to do something about it, right? And then there's also the bifurcation of the community and what the community needs versus what the leaders of that community think are the solutions. So, like, for example, a lot of the drug wars actually prosecuted in the 1990s, especially by black leaders, right, at the expense of the black community, because it was just a misdiagnosis. If we just criminalize them more, it'll go away and it won't ravage our communities as much. Unfortunately, that was the wrong diagnosis.
Sure. Well, I'm sure we could go down this track for a long time.
Please stop me.
And it's a fascinating track. It's not one you hear a lot of.
I'm incredibly uncomfortable with this topic.
Well, I was going to say, it's not one you hear a lot of, particularly from folks that look like you.
Yeah, right.
And maybe people, don't take your opinion as, strongly as they might take Thomas Sowell's opinion, but you are very knowledgeable on this topic, and I respect that. One thing you might be more knowledgeable on, given your archetype here, is Russia and the Wagner story.
Good transition, man. You are nailing it.
Do we want to switch to that?
Yeah. No,
I was kind of hoping, Dave, do you have any book call-outs for Thomas Sowell based on what you were talking about?
Black Redneck, White Liberal is great.
That's good. I can't. I'm spacing them all off the top of my head. He's got so many. The guy is so prolific. He just wrote a book on charter schools, and he's like 80. I mean, he could be president right now.
I mean, he was talking to a young Joe Biden, so he has to be.
He is. He's older than Joe Biden, I bet, and he's still sharp.
And he's old, and he grew up in Harlem. Like, he grew up in rough situations. Like, I know there was stories about that I've heard him say in interviews about like hearing gunshots, and he was like sleeping out on like the fire escape and things like that, and there's just gunshots going down below. Like he's from the hood in Harlem. He's got the cred, and he broke himself out of that.
So if anyone's listening and they're like, man, I need a better grip on basic economics, Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics is wonderful. It's a great survey across everything. It touches all the major knowledge, fundamental, like how to think about the economy questions more so than here's a supply and demand graph, and we're going to weigh deadweight loss by calculating the area. He doesn't. There's math in there, but it's not that kind. It's mostly, almost universally, just explaining how the economy works and how to think about it in a principles-based way. So basic economics is always where to start.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's
Wagner
talk about
Group.
the Russia story. Yeah. So it was like during the time we were recording last week, this was all going down. So we didn't know it was happening. We couldn't talk about it. David, take it away.
Yeah, so we're going to get this post-production issue ironed out so you guys get our news closer to when it comes out.
You gotta throw me under the bus,
Hey, man,
don't
you hit me on vaping last week. So.
I'm going to be helping smooth out the post-production.
I'm pretty sure I cut that out on your behalf.
No, you didn't.
Oh, I did
Yeah.
not? Oh,
That's
okay.
cool.
Well,
Yeah. Anyways, but this, yeah, you're right. We were literally talking last week, and this started hitting, and then over that weekend, like I was. Elon Musk posted some meme of people who are staying up all night watching that. That was me. I was the entire time. Okay, so this is what's interesting here is it's both interesting from the Russian perspective, but looking at the way the media related to it tells you a tremendous amount about our media and about the media sphere.
Before we go into the analysis of it, can we lay the groundwork of what happened?
Yeah, well, effectively, the reason I was starting that way is because I wanted to say first how it was reported, and then I want to say what happened.
Okay.
How it was reported. Out of nowhere, this wonderful Nazi suddenly turns into a terrible Nazi, suddenly turns into this wonderful patriot for democracy. And now this man, who was once but a mere hot dog vendor, is now going to take on Putin himself in a one-on-one knife duel in Moscow. Is that fair? Is that a good summary?
This is a great trailer for some kind of strange movie. But I have to back up. Do you want me to cut out the fact that you just called him a wonderful Nazi?
No, what I meant was he was wonderful former Nazi. That's what I meant to say.
No, he's just
because that's what was so frustrating. Because I Googled the guy's name, it was Nazi. And I was like, why is everyone all excited about him?
Prigozhin, right?
Yeah, right.
He was the leader of the Wagner group.
Right.
He's the mercenary group.
Wagner
He's
was
just
a
the guy.
Nazi, so he's named it after a composer who was associated with Nazis, etc.
Okay, hold on.
He's just the guy that they outsource their war crimes to. That's all. He's a wonderful beacon of democracy.
Well, that's
good guy.
And that's how the media was okay, so it boiled down to a very simple Wagner group, good, bad, because they're against Putin now, right? Even though they've been some of the frontline soldiers and all this stuff.
Yeah, I hold on. This is getting very convoluted. I think we need to lay the groundwork.
All right. So the actual story.
Hold on. Let me just see what I can do, and then you fill in the gaps, okay? Because this is a lot. Russia's fighting Ukraine. We've got that much. The Wagner Group has been fighting on behalf of Russia against Ukraine, correct? As a mercenary group, a private army, effectively.
And
right?
and they put a lot of the prisoners and stuff like that. It's your way out.
Okay.
You kind of get put into this mercenary.
Yeah.
Right.
Think of them as our Blackwater.
Okay, sure. Exactly.
They're Blackwater.
Private mercenary group. Are you Russian?
No.
Are you an undercover Russian?
No.
Just kidding. Okay, so Wagner Group is fighting on behalf of Russia against Ukraine. Private mercenary group also apparently contains prisoners. Great. They were on Russia's side. And then all of a sudden, he switches and he's marching towards Moscow, right? Why did he do that? And you can clarify how it was reported and then what the actual
So what was reported was, look at this thing that's happening. Isn't this great? What wasn't reported and was really weird because we couldn't find a lot of great sourcing on this. I was actually super confident on until I actually saw RFK repeat it a few days later, and then it became mainstream after that, and I got a lot more sourcing. Was that a couple months ago, the Russian government had said, hey, all you private military corporations, you now have to fold into the reporting architecture and everything of the Russian military. Effectively,
he was trying to take over.
Yeah, nationalizing.
They're nationalizing the mercenary groups.
It's important to understand too that the Wagner itself, Wagner, whatever, is a creation of Putin, right? So this dude, Piozin, you read his biography, it's wild, man. He was selling hot dogs in Moscow, and then he had a little restaurant, and then Putin went to the restaurant one time, and then yada, yada, yada. He's now in charge of one of the most, notorious private military contractors in the world, running around Africa and the Middle East, killing people.
Crazy.
It's wild. It doesn't read like it can be true, and I wouldn't believe it if it wasn't so confirmed by so many different media sources over such a long period of time. It's completely bizarre. So anyways, so they say, hey, you got to do this all by July. And, you know, there's that.
Like integrate into the Russian military.
Yeah, like July 1st was the deadline.
And then of course we had a lot of uncertainty, right? Because the internet was shut down in Russia when this all happened. And that was very like, boom, sudden, no internet in Russia, right? So we would get this stuff out by, you know, satellite phone and other kind of non-main internet streams. And then what we had was, okay, so I can't pronounce these names. Prigozhin? Prigozhin.
I say
there
Prigozhin.
Prigozhin, that's right. Basically, what he was saying is that, one, you have to separate what he says from what he's doing, right? So there's the real reason, which is we don't want to be part of the Russian military. Potentially, that's number one reason. Two, he said, hey, y'all shelled me last week, and that sucked, right?
Okay, so what's that?
He got attacked.
Wagner?
Yeah, he got attacked by friendly fire by being shelled by other Russian troops.
By accident or on purpose?
That was not clear. He makes it seem like it was on purpose, and it would suit his books, right, to make it seem like it was on purpose because of this. He obviously didn't come out and say, hey, you guys want to fold us in the Russian military, and we don't like that, so we're leaving. That's stupid, right? That wouldn't win the messaging war, right? The guy's playing a game. So he said, hey, the secretary of the Ministry of Defense is lying to Putin. He doesn't actually know what's going on the ground. I'm going to march to Moscow to tell Putin what's really going on. Notice he never said a thing about overthrowing Putin, but the U.S. media elite pretty much said this guy's going to take out Putin, right, in this coup. When you say coup, you don't mean, hey, I'm going to correct the record on the reports being given to the president. A coup means overthrowing the government. So what the heck was the media reporting when they report as a coup? I don't know what that doesn't make any sense. It's not a coup, right? Am I right?
It seems like they were just implying a lot.
Yeah, right. It was like this is good because Putin bad, and it might have been some of like the immediate media cycle stuff, like people get over their skis because of that. And even for me, like the big fear, the wrong people get the wrong things at the wrong time, and someone in radical and there's radical factions within Russia basically that have been saying for the last, year now, hey, we really need to just drop a nuke on Kiev and just get that done with because people aren't afraid of nukes anymore. And we need to make them afraid again. Like that's a real thing going on in Russia. I've read it.
Damn.
And I've read the translated Russian things about that.
Yeah, like their Brian Stelters on their like corporate news media will be saying things like this. Like,
that's a terrifying thought that there are other Brian Stelters.
Yeah, I don't know why that was the name. they're Don Lemons.
Just
they're Rachel Maddow's. Right.
Wow.
Oh,
even more terrifying than an actual nuke being dropped on an actual city that there are other Brian Stelters. But seriously, back to that, that's awful that there are people who are like, hey, we just need to do this because we need to reassert that this is something to be afraid of. We need to use this to assert our authority, our dominance, our power in this conflict. Anybody who is on the pro-Ukrainian side right now needs to think about that, that eventuality, that they might do that if the situation doesn't improve.
Additionally, that if you're in the West, what happens when the alarm goes off and a nuke's been deployed and it's flying in the 2-minute flight from Moscow or someplace in Russia to Kiev, and you're in America, and you say, we have a missile in the air, we think it's a nuke, do we deploy? And you press the button, and you have 1,000, 1,800, something nukes fly towards Russia, and then Russia goes, oh, the Americans are launching 2,800 nukes fly out of Russia towards America. That's the escalatory spiral, and that's the ending of the West, period.
And that's how fast that goes.
Yeah.
It's
20
one
minutes.
in the air, and it's probably a nuke. We're not sure, but do we do it or do we not do it? Right. That's all it takes.
That's all it takes.
Is that 2 minutes?
Theoretically, right? Like in theory, the problem with escalatory spirals, and we ran into this a whole bunch of times in the Cold War, and that's our reference point for understanding these things. Is there were several times when we were like calling up the Kremlin and be like, hey, did you launch that nuke? He's like, no, it was an accident. And like what happens when you call Biden and be like, yeah, we launched the nuke, Biden. We're nuking Kiev. I hope you got your guys out in time. If that happens, what happens? So that's the danger of a actual coup, right? Because you don't know who fills that vacuum, right? It could be someone in the ultra nationalist, like the person that everyone claims Putin is might actually get control of the codes. That's the real danger, right? Because everyone says Putin's a crazy person who doesn't know what's going on.
But if he was, you would think he would have already just like launched a nuke.
Right. And that's like ginning up fear. That's American media. But I do think that that's the danger. One of the things that Pyozhin also said is that the war was started under false pretenses, under pressure from the defense establishment within Russia, which is also really interesting because that was taken like gospel also by the American military, right? Or American media, which was saying that, the whole casus belli of the war of NATO expansion and the Naziification of Ukraine. I don't think anyone ever believes that Ukraine's actually occupied by Nazis in the sense of like the whole power structure is corrupted by Nazism, right? That said, there were, as we reported a couple weeks ago, there were these military organizations like the Azov Battalion that were conducting a quasi unofficial. No, it was. That's not right. An unofficial genocide against Russian civilian populations in the Donbass prior to this that was supposed to be stopped by the Minsk Accords and then wasn't stopped by the Minsk Accords on either side. And so it just escalated into this place. We were in an escalatory spiral and we tried to interrupt it with 2 different Minsk Accords and we couldn't do it because the West was largely conflicted about it. It was like, well, we want Russia to kind of get overbalanced and to spend a bunch of money so we don't have to. And we also don't want all these people to die, and we're going to kind of split the difference. And then there's the factions of Germany and France want peace, but America doesn't. You know, those kind of dynamics as well. So the media pretty much basically said, you know, for a long time, the Wagner group was a bunch of Nazis. Wagner was a composer in Nazi Germany who was very popular. And they all flipped and they said, well, they're not a neo-Nazi organization anymore. They're now anti-Putin. Therefore, they're good guys.
And this was a great time. Don't need to pull it up, but seeing the memes of like the NPC character with the back head flap open and the chip of like Wagner bad coming out and Wagner good going in was just
well, before any of this happened, the average person didn't know anything about Wagner.
So wait,
they didn't know who it was.
You're telling me that right now, in this war over Ukraine, there's one side has a group of Nazis that are fighting on their behalf, and the other side has a group of Nazis that are fighting on their behalf.
Well, and that's the thing with the Wagner group, right? Is because it's if you're a Russian nationalist, are you a Nazi? When the Nazis invaded Russia.
Well, I don't know. All of these are just magic words used to put spells on the public. They don't mean anything. They're just magic words that get people triggered into certain modes of thinking.
Yeah, and in Wagner, I don't know anything about as a composer. Right, the whole premise that it's a neo-Nazi organization is just premised on the idea that Wagner was a neo-Nazi, therefore, or was a Nazi, therefore, anyone who names their organization Wagner or Wagner, if you're Russian / Ukrainian, right, or German, is a Nazi organization. I'm not confident about that. I don't know. I mean, I read like 3 different things on this Pyozhin guy just because I couldn't believe what I read about him, and none of it was substantiated by him saying that this is what it was. And for all I know, Wagner is he just liked the music. I don't know. Who knows? So, but the important thing is that what the media didn't immediately report at all was that he was trying to overthrow Putin. In fact, from the beginning, he was claiming that the Secretary of Defense was lying to Putin, and that is the real manipulation here. I can see from the American West media, and why so few people have confidence in them is because in an incredibly urgent, like stressful situation, they're like, "Oh, it's a coup, just like all the other Russian coups." It's like,
they just reported something like very unsubstantiated in a moment of extreme uncertainty.
Yeah, at worst, it's a bad summary. At best, it's like, at best, it's a bad summary. At worst, it's like an outright manipulation, right? Because a coup is to overthrow the power structure. If you're just saying, and I looked at the video, translated video, and it said nothing about Putin. In fact, it was defending Putin from his defense minister and saying he's being misled. And you could read that as like, well, he was playing political. The media game.
Yeah.
But if you're marching to Moscow to take out the head of the state, which is what a coup is, what do you do? I mean, what are you doing here? It's obviously not the right word, right? So, and I didn't know the right word. I'm just like trying to suss out what the hell's going on.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you're going to take out the head of state, do you march in such a like ceremonial kind of way and like make it very public, or is it something that's a little bit more like clandestine?
They did allegedly take down 7 helicopters, though, right? I think it was 7.
Right, and there was some troops, Russian military troops that were taken out. It's important to note too that like 80%, 90% of the Wagner group troops never left their assignment their posts, right? This is only a small component of it from what I've read. So it's weird because we kind of think about it like these huge numbers, right? That this was like a troop column of 100,000 troops marching down the road.
It was
to
like
Moscow.
a few thousand total in all of Wagner Group. It's
Right,
like a few thousand.
right. So we kind of think about these proportions that aren't right because Wagner total in like 2019 had like 6,000 total employees. That's what I read. That's official government.
According to
documents?
Wikipedia, I don't know if you want to. It's now 50,000 plus as of December 2022.
Those are all those prisoners.
That seems. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they hired while they were going to go conduct a national invasion.
You think they pay pretty well?
Here's one of the things.
Probably better than not if you're a prisoner though. I don't think it.
Here's one of the things, and this
minimum
is
wage.
Evan's losing it back here.
Here's one of the things, and this is just something that I just kind of went down a little journey while you were talking on. A lot of the information's coming out of Bellingcat, and Bellingcat's like a PSYOP organization out of the Netherlands, and that's what they
run the Elon clip.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that was the whole thing with that interview. I remember. Who did the interview? I can't remember. Regardless, and remember, Elon was just saying, you know what Bellingcat does? They're a PSYOP organization. And it's just like, I just went through this, and it's just like, it goes to Bellingcat, and the amount of things that they've been the primary source on is, when you just come into it, it's like the weapons, the chemical weapons in Syrian civil war, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. Like, it's just interesting. It's just interesting that there's a lot of fog of war and a lot of PSYOPs probably going on some of this stuff, right?
Right.
There's a lot of things that we just don't know. I know I was seeing on Twitter, I was seeing a lot of information. I was seeing a lot of videos from like Wagner troops that are like, no, I'm still pro Putin and things like that. Like, just be careful with what you're watching and kind of getting super emotionally invested in. There's a lot of things that we just don't know, right?
I think that's really good advice. And I think that's probably the key takeaway here is, especially in the heat of the moment, don't go throwing yourself into, well, I was feeling this way about this person or group, and now because of the media's reporting on this in this very tense moment of incredible uncertainty, I now feel very strongly this other way. Like, don't let yourself be a windsock for the American media, right? That's just, it's not very becoming, and it only stands to backfire, really, right? Like, you got to just take some time, keep the things at arm's length like we've been trying to do here, right?
Yeah, it's not very becoming. No, I like that way.
You just say coming.
You're
and
better.
Laugh.
You're better than that.
It's just not. Yeah, you're better. Do better.
Do better.
But I guess we haven't really gotten into the aftermath of all this stuff too, is because now Prigozhin he was essentially pardoned and he's given a vacation in Belarus.
Where
that's the charming way.
Probably end with an early ending. I can't imagine. I mean, come on.
He's gonna fall off. He's gonna die in a tragic boating accident.
He lost all his Bitcoin in that boating.
But there is still a criminal investigation going on over him from the last reports that I saw. So
in Russia.
So he's still like, it's a strange situation, right? Because it was like a compromise to end it, to kind of unify and all that kind of stuff.
In a lot of ways, I feel like it's intentionally vague on what's actually happening right now. Because like there's all sorts of different theories on what happened here, right? Like there's the people that are theorizing that this was actually a plan between Putin and Prigozhin, right? There's the people that are like, oh no, he actually went full coup, right? Like there's a lot of, again, fog of war here right now. So like, I think that things are intentionally vague, but my understanding is that Putin announced saying that in order to mend the wounds of this thing right now, he's going to be pardoned, right? Like, I think that was the reason in the broker deal between Russia and Belarus.
Right. It was just that only after that, I read a report that still said that there was a criminal investigation going on against him. So I don't know. But I mean, he gets to go there. Wagner troops may leave to Belarus too, if they were kind of part of that, or they want to leave. They don't want to be part of a war anymore, or sign on to the traditional military. So at the end of the day, the conclusion is Putin got what he wanted. The private military contractors being folded into the government reporting infrastructure. The Russian people, a lot of the Russian institutions kind of had their loyalty tested, and overwhelmingly they were all kind of stuck with Putin. It looks like. I mean, I kind of would like it if there were more dissent, but I mean, you're a unitary state with a dictator who is known for killing his opposition. I can't imagine how you would make a different decision, right? I'm like, if I was Russian, I'd be like, Sir, Mr. Putin. I mean, like, I can't imagine. Like you're in that moment and you have this opportunity to rise up and throw over a coup. If that was really what was happening, you'd think there would be a lot more going on.
Well, but again, though, I mean, we're dealing with obviously a very manipulative Western media who has its own narrative, and the other side of the narrative is coming from a obviously very manipulated state media in Russia. So it's like, can we believe anything that we're seeing or hearing coming out of this situation?
It's remember, this is war. Like if everybody was being truthful, like that would be bad. That would be bad to just give everybody your secrets on what you're doing. Right?
Exactly.
Like,
so can we believe anything that we're seeing or hearing out of this whole situation?
I think we do know is that there was an act to fold them into the military. There was this rebellion / thing that happened where this private military contractor did not want to do that and push back. I think the soundest evidence we have is he has an incentive, and he responded to that incentive by trying to say, I'm going to march on Moscow, right? And there was, we have the video evidence and the photographic evidence of conflicts that happened because of that. And now it's kind of like there's a deal that he says happened, but it gets very vague after that. I mean, I don't know. We haven't had any, as far as I know, and I haven't seen in a few days. I haven't checked, but there hasn't been any more videos from Prigozhin about his status and what he's got going on.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah. I got another surprise issue if you want to talk about it, though.
We got 15 minutes until you got to leave.
All right. So the ATF, this is, okay. So it's funny because we started out with a bunch of white pills today. We got a bunch of great stuff that happened at the Supreme Court. Very interesting. Great. The U.S. Senate let us down again. So the U.S. Senate voted against a House resolution. So what happens is the ATF puts in a new regulation, says, hey, if you got a pistol brace, you got to register with the government. Now, for the entirety of American jurisprudence, gun registration has been against the law. When you go in and you apply for a gun, very specifically, it is written so that you get the background check, and the background check is not held by the government; it's held by the organization, the seller of the gun, and they're not instructed to give it to the government at any given time. So, but if you have a pistol brace, and a pistol brace is like a brace that goes on the end of a pistol that straps it to your arm, right, and so you can pew pew, right.
More accurately than you otherwise could with a handgun, typically.
Yeah, if you will, and
that's the idea.
And it's great. It's great, especially if you're missing another arm, right? One of the sell points for pistol braces is that if you can't really brace with the other hand, it's a good brace for that.
I see.
And it's especially popular amongst military veterans who are disabled in some way from their other arm. So the ATF said, hey, we're going to have this we're going to ban it. And then it was like, maybe we'll not ban it, but we're just going to register them all. And we're kind of in this weird thing. And the banning actually got held up by the courts, but the registration's kind of moving forward. And so the House Republicans passed a resolution that was said, we don't want this, get rid of it. And the Senate voted it down. One of the great things here is we have the Senate Democrats, and this is just what happens every time. And I'm not the biggest gun guy. I have gun culture in my blood, but it's not like the thing that really wakes me up in the morning as much as my brothers and my family. But there's nothing more delicious than Democrats trying to talk about guns and why they should be banned. They're so funny. And so here's a great Senator Dick Durbin talking from, he's a senator from Illinois talking about the pistol brace.
We all know because of the ammunition magazines that can be strapped onto so many pistols that these become automatic weapons similar to AK-47s.
What?
Pistols with stabilizing braces have a reputation in this modern America, though they have been formally forbidden and prohibited, regulated for almost 90 years.
What the hell is he even saying?
He doesn't know.
Okay, so he thinks that a pistol brace, which stabilizes the firearm to your forearm, makes it such that you can now turn a semi-automatic pistol into an automatic pistol.
Yeah,
it's like they took the bump stock message and the pistol, where they just smashed it together and said, like, "This is a good speech. Have at it, Dick.
Tell me
good luck."
You've never touched a firearm without telling me you've never touched a firearm. That. Is there more? Can we watch more?
There's so many in that Twitter feed that I had.
Let's keep going.
There's so many because all of them are just talking out their ass. It's so hilarious.
Well, the funniest thing is even just the tiniest bit of research, the tiniest bit. Google it. You would know you're sounding like a freaking idiot. And now he's like on the record, on C-SPAN, all over the internet.
The thing is,
like
constituents don't care.
Goon.
It's just pistol brace bad because the NRA's for it, right?
I guess the problem is though that the people that are going to listen and take what he's saying as truth aren't going to do that research.
Right.
They're just going to regurgitate that false narrative, and think for themselves that pistol braces are just, you know, Satan's gift to people that want to shoot up schools.
And that's why you should share the Liberty Portal podcast with your friends and family and hit that notification bell and like and subscribe so we can get this message out. One of the things is that registration is so clearly unconstitutional. And obviously we have this by both Heller versus DC in 2008 and the later case, which I'm currently spacing. That pretty much says like, hey, if you're trying to get the government to, if you're going to get private individuals to register their firearms, it's the same as banning them. Because as soon as you give the government a giant list of who has firearms and who doesn't, obviously that's sketchy, right? Who do they go after first? If there's a problem with the government, well, it's the guys who own the guns. Well, if you give them a registration, obviously that's a de facto banning of your and limitation of your Second Amendment rights. So it is such an obvious problem. An obvious constitutional problem, but they're going forward with it anyways. The ATF is going to do it just like they did the student loans, just like they're doing everything else. They're just going to go throw it at the courts, get it jammed up in the courts so they can say they did something and raise money on it.
Well, and I'll reiterate something I said last week, because I was just in Canada not too long ago talking with my Canadian family about
about you had to do that.
I'm sorry too. I came back with like their Canadian diseases and things. The stain of communism is strong. But one of the things that they kind of explained to me what was going on with the handgun ban was this. They're not banning handguns, they're banning the buying and selling of handguns and also like the inheritance of handguns. So once you have your handgun registered, you are the last owner of that handgun and it has to be turned in when you die. You can't sell it off, you can't give it off to your kids. So it's not an active handgun ban, but it's the transaction involved with handguns.
And that's how Grandpa lived for 1,000 years.
Yeah,
right there. Grandpa never died.
Yeah, or it's unfortunate he lost all his handguns in a boating accident.
That's right. That's right.
Pretty typical.
Yeah.
But it is just always remember of like where these things lead. Like the Second Amendment exists in America, but at the end of the day, it's just on a piece of paper. Legislators will do things and they will make bans, and the Constitution only is just, it's much more of like a suggestion to a lot of people. It's like nobody actually cares about the Constitution anymore. Like the Second Amendment is dying and has died for a long period of time right here, and like things will continue to progress in this direction, it seems like, unless legitimate action is kind of taken against this progression of being a very anti-gun in our culture.
There's a couple of those, right? One is like increasing gun culture, which is making it safe, making it obviously more friendly to the individual who is not necessarily in gun culture to get involved, right? That's one of it. Black Guns Matter, and Colin Noir, and all those guys doing a great job with the black.
And Maj Touré just got arrested.
Really?
Too. Yeah, like a week ago, if I remember right.
Over what?
He was on a call. I haven't looked into it at all, but I believe he was like on a call with Tom Woods or something when the cops came up to him and arrested him. I don't know the story of here. He's kind of like the leader of the Black Guns Matter out in Philadelphia, I believe, is where he's from. But he got arrested. I don't know what the current status is. I haven't really looked into it at all. But it had to do with gun stuff.
Really?
So,
man.
I mean, that's like his main issue.
Oh, yeah.
He's educating people in the inner city in Philadelphia
on gun safety and things like that.
Yeah. And then there's other ones like, participating in like the kind of institutions that participate and raise general consciousness and awareness of the good uses of firearms in a free society. And, and then lastly, it's like civil institutions, stuff like that. And it's technology. In fact, Michael Malice had the founder of Defense Distributed on
Cody Wilson
on and talking about the ghost gun and 3D printing guns and stuff like that, which is all very important for the overall firmness and institution of the Second Amendment in the United States. And if you don't know who that is, you definitely check him out and support his work.
I believe to further kind of follow up on that, I believe Maj has been bailed out, but he was arrested Wednesday.
Wow.
2 weeks ago, two Wednesdays ago, I believe.
Does it state the charges?
During a live interview with Tom Woods. Yeah. On suspicion of carrying a concealed weapon without a license.
Huh.
Well,
interesting.
We're going to have to follow up on that next week because David's got to get out of here and do his day job. But if you're watching at home, we really appreciate you. Share, Review us wherever it is that you're watching. If it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, just drop us a 5-star review right this second. If you're on YouTube, give us that thumbs up. We appreciate you very much.
And hit the notification bell.
And hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Thanks so much. See you next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Liberty Portal podcast. For more episodes, news, and Liberty-focused content, visit libertyportal.com and be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. If you liked what you heard on the show, we appreciate you sharing it with your friends and giving us a review on your podcast platform of choice.